We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. Make sure you subscribe and follow the podcast on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Exclusive videos weekly. You can get links to all the social media sites at bookedonrock.com. Matt Karpe is our guest. He's here to talk about his book, Tool, Every Album, Every Song. This is another one in a great series of books by Sonic Bond Publishing called On Track. Tool, one of the most unique bands in rock and metal history. Their music extremely complex and intelligent, while their insistence on privacy makes them an enigma to many. In this book, Matt Karpe documents all of this Los Angeles band's studio releases, from the raw and unapologetic 1991 demo tape to their 2019 epic Fear Inoculum. He gives the stories behind every song, including the pivotal tracks like Sober, Ænema, Schism, Lateralus, and Rosetta Stoned. It's an in-depth look at one of the greatest progressive rock bands of all time. A playlist of Tool in the show notes page, but first, here is Matt Karpe. Hi, Matt. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Eric.
I was telling you before we started recording, I'm a casual fan of Tool, so this was a great way to introduce myself to the band as a whole, their body of work, and just find out a lot of great information about the band, their history, and where they're at right up until today. I do remember being introduced to the band through the song Sober, and the video was on all the time. And during my radio days, I played Stinkfist. I remember when that was a new single. But
my favorite Tool song, that is.
Great song. But outside of that, if I heard a Tool song on the radio, I would know it's them. But I really never invested the time into the band, which I really should have. So I'm glad I did. And I'm going to, at the end of this, give you an opinion that might not be popular among Tool fans. Maybe it is. We'll see. But I'd be interested in getting your thoughts on that. But let's start with when and how this band formed and the interesting backgrounds of each member leading up to the formation of Tool.
Yeah, so each member, they all come from a different part of the US. Maynard, the lead singer, I mean, his creativity, I guess, was kind of stifled in his younger years, but he'd always been artistic. He ended up taking on different sort of hobbies such as wrestling in school, but his art and sort of design was sort of one of his main sort of folk passions, I guess, to begin with. In fact, sort of 3 out of the 4 guys from Tool, they all had an artistic background. Danny Carey sort of grew up with the drums, and he sort of quickly became a drummer. He was in college bands and whatnot. Paul D'Amour and Adam Jones, they was sort of wanting to get into film in terms of the design of props and that kind of thing. Maynard was art and design, but then sort of moved into, because he needed the money, really, sort of working in shop fronts, creating the presentations of pet shops, the designs of the stands for what everything the product went onto. But then at some point, they all kind of decided Los Angeles was the destination that they wanted to get to. Obviously, Hollywood was the allure of Hollywood in terms of the movies and that kind of thing. And it just so happened that I guess all the band members met one another through going out and about in Los Angeles, and music was Maynard's sort of main passion, and he'd had some bands back in Boston and other areas where he lived. And it was when sort of he moved to Los Angeles. Of course, that was sort of the late 80s. So the hair metal scene was kind of still about. It was slowly dying when Guns N' Roses arrived. They sort of moved, while they looked like a hair metal band, they was a bit more of a sort of standard sort of hard rock band. But they sort of all come together through mutual friendships, and, the early sort of beginnings of Tool formed through sort of friends like Green Jelly. They was playing in the loft, in their sort of famous loft where they used to have parties and crazy things going on. And once people heard earlier recordings of Maynard's bands from back where he lived before, they realized that they had like this really enigmatic frontman whose voice was just something completely different, really abrasive performances and stage presence. And eventually the 4 just came together, and the rest, as they say, is history. They started out a lot different sound-wise to what everybody knows Tool to be today.
Now, who are those four guys? Because there was one lineup change, but only one. There's one guy that's no longer in the band. Who was in the original
so the original lineup was Adam Jones on guitar, Paul D'Amour on bass, Danny Carey on drums, and Maynard as the vocalist. Paul is the only member of the band that left in the end. So the original four, they're the ones that brought Tool up from an alternative metal sound, started getting into the progressive waters. So that is obviously the founding members of the band.
What about the origins of that band name? What was it originally called? And can you talk about why Maynard thought Tool was the perfect name? It served as a double entendre.
Yeah, so they was looking at different names. Toolshed became one of the early sort of options and one that they were potentially running with. But as a lot of the music would later reveal, that there were so many hidden meanings to the songs, even though sort of some of the lyrics may have, to the naked eye, appear to mean something, one particular thing. Stinkfist, for example, a lot of people sort of have a general idea of what that song is supposed to mean lyrically. The band kind of wanted people to dig deeper, find sort of perhaps emotions within themselves. And Tool, like you said, double entendre. If you see the demo tape, that now sort of fairly iconic image that looks like a certain part of a man, they decided just to cut it to Tool because that was like the option of it opened so many possibilities within their music, within the meanings, and within the listener that was obviously wanting to find their own kind of favorite band. The
picture's in the book, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
That so-called wrench. It's supposed to be a wrench, right?
Supposed to be, yeah. There's certainly a phallic sort of reference to it as well.
Yeah. Let's talk about that demo. Before the multi-platinum 1993 album Undertow, there was that demo, and it's titled 72826. That was put out in 1991. Why that title, and what are we hearing on this album?
Yeah, so you'll probably know better than me in terms of the numbers are supposed to correlate to a touchpad phone, which each number is supposed to mean a letter, and somehow this is supposed to mean the word Satan. By putting in a 7 is supposed to be the S, the 2, A, supposedly. We don't have that kind of technology here, or certainly when this demo would have come out, I would have been too young to know whether we had anything like that in the UK. But yeah, the demo was such a raw sound for Tool. Just putting things into perspective, obviously 1991, the grunge movement was like the big rise in rock music, sort of the mainstream exposure that was getting through the likes of Nirvana and Soundgarden and Pearl Jam. So while a lot of eyes would have been on the grunge movement up in Seattle, Tool down in Los Angeles was creating their own kind of small hype. They were playing at the Green Jelly Loft, which is where a couple of the tracks on the demo were recorded. And that was a small community of fans would have been there to hear it. And then the sort of limited number of tapes was distributed to record companies and friends and family. There was enough in that music, the abrasiveness, the Maynard's performances, his vocal performances, the guitars, the drums, the bass. No one could really potentially see at the time the direction the band would elevate themselves to going forward. But for a first tape, there was obviously something there that people could feel, and it was really the sort of the guitar power, Danny Carey's spectacular drum patterns. It all seemed to come together quite naturally, considering it was a first effort for a band. And yeah, the word sort of quickly spread across Los Angeles about them. And then they sort of, at the start, they had to play sort of less glamorous clubs just to sort of get live performances under the belt, try and own their craft a little bit, and more of a cohesiveness between obviously each member when on stage. But it was a solid sort of foundation that Tool had laid for themselves.
This begins a trend that continues to this day, no lyrics printed on the album art. And you quote Adam Jones explaining why that is. Can you talk about that?
I think, again, it's while the lyrics may mean or may have a sort of a direct meaning to many, Tool just wanted people to listen and form their own opinions of the songs. There's a lot of bands out there that use ambiguous lyrics that could mean 2, 3, 4, 5 things, but it was more they wanted the listener to draw their own conclusion. They wanted them to listen to the music in one aspect, but then listen to the lyrics on a different side, and then potentially put everything together and have a much more of a rewarding listen.
Some of the songs on this demo, by the way, end up on that official first release, 1993's Undertow, most notably the track Sober. The major labels, they start to see the dollar signs when they see a band like this. But Maynard, he's onto them pretty quickly. He wasn't going to fall for their tactics. In fact, Tool had no intentions of gaining fame or fortune. So what label do they eventually sign with, and why that label in particular?
Yeah, so they did have the options such as Atlantic Records, Epic, Interscope. Everybody knows that they are three of the biggest record labels out there, and they always have been. But there was a lesser known, I guess, unless you was around the Los Angeles area, label known as Zoo Entertainment, who had recently signed Green Jelly, who obviously had become friends of the band, who allowed them to use their rehearsal space and play the show, especially the New Year's Eve show that a couple of the songs were recorded at, that made the upcoming EP. So Zoo Entertainment was, they offered basically the most important thing for any band, I guess, which doesn't always happen and definitely didn't happen throughout the 90s, is wanting to remain completely in control of their music, of the artistic direction they're going in. And Lou Maglia, who owned Zoo, he was prepared to offer this. He could see the vision, of what Tool wanted to be and how they wanted to go about things. And he also wanted to put more money into the band's live performances, because, again, at the time, they was only be able to play small stages, but they wanted to go bigger with their show. They wanted the backdrops and the lights, and just to create a more immersive feel for the people that are paying their hard-earned money to go and watch these bands. So Zoo seemed, not necessarily to a wider audience, but to Tool, it was like a perfect fit, because they was able to remain doing what they wanted to do without any pressures or, any songs being taken off records because they didn't feel that they fit or whatever. They was just allowed to do what they want effectively.
And instead of recording a full album, Tool releases an EP. It's called Opiate. Can you talk about the title track? This is a satire of religion and takes from a Karl Marx hypothesis. Yeah,
there's a lot of that kind of content that Maynard touches on throughout Tool's music as we go further. Yeah, Karl Marx, a hypothesis that religion is an opium for the masses. Yeah, religion is the opium of the people, and that religion acts as a drug for society. Maynard was he'd always been quite outspoken on specific subjects, and now he kind of had a stage to say what he wanted. Not necessarily everybody was going to agree with what he was saying potentially, but he was kind of in that day and age where in the 90s where Rage Against the Machine was coming out with all their views, and there was a lot more anti-political statements in music, basically a freedom of speech, I guess, which perhaps today sometimes is a bit harder to put into your art. But it's still considered one of Tool's most popular songs. I mean, it's a long winding track. There's a great line in that song where Maynard says, "Deaf and blind and dumb and born to follow. What you need is someone strong to guide you." And Keenan at the time there, I guess he was kind of offering himself as a sort of an alternative leader. We will do and say what we want. We want to bring a freedom to our music, and Tool is the band that you want to be listening to.
And then they do put out that first full studio album, which is 93's Undertow. What did Maynard say about why they chose that word for the title, Undertow?
So the quote that I took from there, he said that he liked the idea of an undertow, that feeling that you get when you're standing out in the surf. You just feel like you're being pulled under and out, whether you like it or not. I would hope that the music takes you to that place. It kind of pulls you under and throws you around, and you go with it. For a major release, a first ever album, I guess sometimes you want a title that's perhaps a little bit different to the norm, and it did kind of stick out.
Let's get to the singles from Undertow, well, one in specific. The singles are Sober, Prison Sex, and the title track. The opening bass line to Sober, it pulls you in right away. It's so hypnotic. What is this song about?
Yeah, they mentioned that they had a friend who felt he was always at his most artistic when he was under the influence, whether it be alcohol or drugs. Obviously, being high I guess to some people can heighten your productive nature. And yeah, so that is sort of loosely what the song is based on. And in the quote that I've got here from Adam Jones, you have to take responsibility for what happens ultimately. But some of the best music has been created by people sort of, high at the time or stoned or drunk.
Late 60s.
I guess
late
there's something.
60s, that whole era was, Hendrix and
Exactly, yeah. So it can be a good thing. It might not always be. But so that's kind of loosely what Sober's based on. But again, I think at the time when the song came out, especially the video hitting music channels, it was a lot of people's first introduction to Tool, and straight away, sort of musically, it was just something completely different. The pace of the song, it wasn't fast, frantic, sort of in your face. It was sort of slow building, methodically paced. And there was plenty of distortion in there, which was going to please sort of perhaps the heavy metal fans. But Danny Carey's drumming was fantastic. The hi-hat grooves. There was a harmonic drenched bass chords, which Paul D'Amour perhaps earned a name from, and obviously the guitars as well, alongside Maynard's sort of fairly hypnotic vocal in that one.
As great as the song is, I think this is one of those instances where the video helped to blow the song up even more so, because it got a lot of play on MTV. It was that claymation video, and that got played a lot. Yeah,
and that was one of the ways Adam Jones kind of got into the arts in the first place. That's how he some of his work would end up being used in films, but he did take a special interest in that kind of claymation design of videos. And a lot of, it's quite like you said, a few of the Tool videos going forward would all include that kind of thing. A lot of bands would also imitate that later on as well, that kind of effect. I'd love to have kind of witnessed one of those videos being made, because that must have taken so long, obviously having to capture each frame as you go along. And again, while the videos, like a lot of bands, didn't necessarily have the same kind of meaning as the song did, that they did make for captivating viewing.
Yeah, right. They said there's really no specific meaning to it. It's just kind of it's just what you can make of it what you will, but it does match the vibe of that song. It's very dark. Undertow sells 3 million copies, and it reached number 19 on Billboard. After 2 years of relentless touring, they returned in 1996 with Ænema, a number 2 debut on Billboard. Bassist Justin Chancellor replaces Paul D'Amour, and this album, you say, is Tool entering new territory musically, and that is a result of the heavy touring, you feel?
I think it's just a natural progression as well of the band. I mean, they probably had a vision at the start of what potentially they wanted to go to in the future, but as I said before, you have to own your craft. You have to learn what each band member's strengths and weaknesses is. And I mean, this Ænema was the one that really sort of put Tool on the map, maybe more globally, I guess, because some of the videos were starting getting played here in the UK. I remember seeing the Stinkfist video. And again, while the video is very sort of out there and strange musically, you could see that the style was changing. So Stinkfist is kind of more of a sort of an alternative metal song, slightly in keeping with Undertow, but I think it perfectly shows the transition that Tool was on their way to. I mean, I just think that's probably still my favorite song. It's just, that the little middle section there, that pensive sort of eerie interlude before it all fires back in. I can listen to that song on repeat. But as obviously the album progresses, you're getting longer tracks as well in there, built up of sort of various passages. Each passage changes in style and builds to great finales. It's there's some interesting little sort of interludes in there as well. But as a whole, Ænema is still my favorite Tool album.
Yeah, that industrial opening is so cool. It just sets the mood right away.
It builds up into that early lead riff. And once that sort of comes in, you can kind of feel that the next stage of Tool is kind of coming in. It's a new era of the band. They're not quite as rough and ragged, I guess, as what you get on the Opiate and Undertow EPs. Well, of course, perhaps you can thank David Bottrell for that. He came in as the producer on that record. They used Sylvia Massey for the album before and the EP. David Bottrell has a lot more of a cleaner cut production, but he could see what Tool wanted to do, and they worked together to get the ideal sound, to keep it dark and sort of low and groovy, But there was also, I felt certainly with some of the songs, there was a bit more of an accessibility to them.
The critics, you say, overlooked, or they focused too much on that self-explanatory title of Stinkfist. They overlooked the message of the lyrics.
Yeah, a lot of people seem to think it's to do with the theme of anal sex, which again, previously on the Undertow album, the song 4 Degrees seemed to have a similar sort of sexual innuendo. But again, this is one of sort of Maynard's great qualities as a songwriter, how he can construct them to offer such multiple meanings. I mean, this one, he sort of, the brief times, because he doesn't often talk about, what the songs mean in his mind, but it's opening one's eye to a whole other sensual and physical reality. Tool touch on that a lot. Sometimes it can be a little bit too hard to grasp. I'm not going to say that I can envision everything he's trying to say or what he kind of wants you to feel. It's not always an easy thing with Tool, but with this one, that was his kind of idea. And across the whole of the album, the idea of evolution and change is the overwhelming theme as we go along.
What about the title track to Ænema that was dedicated to a friend of Tool, the late great comedian Bill Hicks? And Hicks wasn't just your average comedian either. The guys in Tool, Maynard especially, really connected with his art. You talk about how Maynard incorporates Bill's work into the lyrics. It's based on a Hicks comedy album, right?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know how popular Bill was in terms of, a worldwide audience. It's someone, I mean, at the time when the album came out, I was 10 years old. As I grew up through music, he was not somebody that I sort of particularly had heard of. So I had to kind of go back as well and see what sort of Bill was all about in his work. The two became friends. I think it was in the Lollapalooza festival a couple of years beforehand that Bill came out on stage and introduced Tool to the audience. Bill was like an inspiration to Maynard, and the Ænema track is based on Hicks's Arizona Bay piece, which again is kind of part of the overwhelming theme of the whole album, where Keenan's he ends up having a vicious contempt for Los Angeles, the city where he lives. So, while it's a lot of people consider it the city of angels, the city of dreams, that's where you go to create fame and fortune. He uses sort of Hicks's philosophy of how LA could happily fall into a big black hole, flush it all away, rid the city of all the vermin and the negative aspects of the city. And yeah, that's he kind of sings that part of the song as in a rock jingle over a bouncing drum rhythm, which is kind of you can kind of feel it's slightly tongue-in-cheek, but the message and the meaning is a very serious one in Maynard's mind, at least.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. Matt Karpe's on the show to talk about his book, Tool, Every Album, Every Song, which you can get through burningshed.com. Amazon, too, if you want to get it there, too. The 2000 box set, Salival, includes live tracks, outtakes, and videos. An amazing cover of Zeppelin's No Quarters included on this one. I had never heard it before, found it on YouTube, and it's a great recording. Quite a bit of activity within the band, record label issues leading up to this. We also get the formation of the band, A Perfect Circle. Where was Tool as a band at around this time? Because you write in the book that fans were wondering if Ænema would be the last studio album they were going to hear from Tool.
Yeah, I think their songwriting process has always been well documented, where Adam, by now it was Justin and Danny, they would kind of write the musical pieces and go through it all, vigorously editing and re-recording until they basically felt that the music was right. And then they would hand it over to Maynard, who would be able to listen to it, get a feel of the content, and then formalize his own lyrical passages around the music. At this time, Maynard was becoming a little bit impatient. Sort of everything was kind of stop-starting. And yeah, he, being the artist he was, as we know he would go on to be, he had different ideas for more projects. And another one of those, like you said, was A Perfect Circle. Sort of less progressive, but he wanted something a little bit more artistic and darker. A Perfect Circle was that with the Mir de Nom's debut album, which did do pretty well mainstream wise. Sold a lot of records, got in the top 5 of the Billboard 200. I remember over here in the UK, the album was voted the album of the year in 2000 and do I want to say 2000? I think it was. So I think it was just the fact that he got a bit tired of waiting around for the other guys to get the music done. He just wanted to remain creative and don't waste no time. If we'll leave them to it, let them crack on with that kind of thing. We'll do this and we'll come back to tour when the time's right.
Yeah, it led to some friction because that album did so well. And you talk about this, you lead off the chapter for the 2001 album, Lateralus. By the way, I had to do a lot of searching for phonetic, make sure I pronounce these words correctly. And so there's stuff on YouTube where reporters just flat out say, like, how do you pronounce this? And the guys will laugh. Lateralus, a quote from Maynard, who talks about where the band was at this time, said his bandmates were not happy with his side project, A Perfect Circle. Some friction there, but that did make for good art. At 78 minutes, 51 seconds, this is one of the longest single CD releases ever recorded. Debuts at #1 on Billboard when it's released, and that was released on May 15th of 2001. The singles Schism, Parabola, and the title track. Schism, you write, is perhaps the song which officially crowned Tool the new kings of progressive rock. Can you talk about this song's complexity, specifically the time signatures?
Yes, the Schism was the first song that I heard from Tool. So 2001.
Okay.
I mean, I was a new metal kid.
Yeah.
So I got into heavy music in 2000 when Limp Bizkit was on the music channels, Korn, Linkin Park came up, and Papa Roach. So music video after music video was all these new metal bands. A lot of them were rap rock, rap metal orientated. And I remember I was around a friends, and we would just, in the sort of school holidays, we would just spend hour after hour in front of the TV watching Kerrang. We'd perhaps sometimes ring up and vote for a music video to come on. And we didn't care if it was we didn't care if Limp Bizkit had been on 3 hours ago. We wanted to hear it again. I specifically remember Schism came on the first time I'd heard of this band Tool, and straight away, just the name Tool, I thought that's a bit of a strange name for a band. And when it leads in with that bass riff, I mean, I was like, whoa, this is not, this isn't a rap metal song. This isn't going to be the sort of thing we're used to hearing. And it made you sit up and take notice, I guess. I called it a legendary and otherworldly bass riff, and it just came in so different to what you was hearing at the time. I read that an analysis of the track also found that the meter of the song altered 47 different times. I mean, I'm not going to say I'm the most understanding in terms of the terms of used in song structures and different things. So even for Tool, for this book, I had to really sort of delve into like the reasoning behind them and what sort of everything that went into the song, I guess. And it's quite ironic that one of the lead lyrics is "I know the pieces fit," because this really was a song that was concocted meticulously. I can imagine why it took so long to be put together. And it's just absolutely that time. I do remember it was unlike anything I'd ever heard again, and it was the reason why I did end up going to the shops and buying Lateralus to see what else they was capable of.
Yeah, sonically and lyrically too, like the title track, which is another fascinating story. You get into the details in in the book about where that title comes from.
Yeah, so again, using in typical Tool fashion, they didn't want to sort of stick to the norm and have some kind of simple album title. So combining parts of different words to form this singular head in it. I mean, I said it was, the title is imagistic as the collection of songs which would form the whole album. So they take part of the vastus lateralis leg muscle and combine it with the term of lateral thinking, put it into a blender, and somehow they came out with the term lateralis. Lateralus, that's what we should say. But the song itself, I mean, I must have rewritten this part of the book 4 or 5 times because I'm not the greatest mathematician. I had to read so much up on the Fibonacci sequence, which ultimately and mistakenly, as just Maynard later revealed, that's how the song was put together musically. It turned out it's
challenges the listener and challenges authors who try to write books about Tool.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, obviously, people may listen to this and probably not have a clue what I'm talking about, and I still don't know if I know.
Pop a few Advil as you're trying to work your way through it.
Yeah, but there is a small video cut on YouTube of Joe Rogan's interview with Maynard where they actually talk about how the song came together. It turned out that they was writing in a measure of 987, which how they came to realize it was part of a Fibonacci sequence. 987 is eventually a number in that sequence. The main genesis of the song contains successive time signatures of 98, 88, and 78. 987 being the 16th integer of the Fibonacci sequence. It's an infinitely expanding form of a spiral. In later years, scientists and mathematicians have been able to correlate the equation to the sequence, where again somehow they've managed to find this sequence in science, art, structures such as the Giza Plateau, the Mona Lisa painting. There's a very interesting thing you can look at online about how supposedly facial structures are made in this sequence, and even in the human DNA. It's absolutely mind-boggling, really. But basically,
serious intelligence.
The early part of the sequence begins as 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. It's basically the two previous numbers being added together to form the ever-expanding spiral. So 2 and 3 is 5, 3 and 5 is 8, and so on. It's just mind-boggling, really. And I think that's probably where some people that were able to kind of pick up on this theory, a form of a never-ending and infinitely expanding spiral, where they realised that Tool were miles ahead of the game, especially in that nu metal era, where Tool were getting mentioned alongside the likes of Limp Bizkit and Korn. But then when you listen to the music, you can see that there is a golfing class, I guess. I mean, I love the nu metal bands that I've mentioned, but Tool are on a whole another level.
Yeah, I wonder what Maynard's IQ is.
I have no idea. I mean, it wasn't really. I guess that's the interesting part of the song as well, because, like I say, the music was mistakenly formed around that structure, but he later actually uses lyrical passages to sort of correlate with that as well. Each verse, for example, Keenan's vocals join in at 1 minute 37, which I'm sure wasn't coincidental, is considered alternately of 1.618 minutes, which is the exact same decimal number as the golden ratio, which again is related to the Fibonacci sequence. Looking further, each verse of the track is 55 seconds long. Lo and behold, 55 is a number in the Fibonacci sequence.
Wow.
And it's quite funny, actually, when you hear the interview with Keenan on the Joe Rogan show, he actually calls it a sophomoric move to add his lyrics to that kind of sequence as well. It's kind of like he was trying to make it too obvious of what they was doing, and he actually felt sort of a little bit of a shame in doing that. He rather would have wanted people to kind of work it out for themselves. But
wow, we're all our own worst critic. But
yeah, and the song has stood the test of time. A lot of Tool groups that I'm part of, and I hear people talk of the song being one of their favorites, not necessarily for those reasons we've discussed, but more for the music. It's progressive rock, but it is heavy in places. It's not one of my favorite songs of the band, but in terms of the actual story behind it, maybe one day I will thoroughly grasp the concept and obviously everything that goes into it. But it is hugely interesting reading.
Another long wait for the next album, a 5-year gap. 2006, Tool released 10,000 Days. And Maynard said there is an inherent sense of sadness on this album compared to the previous ones. And the lead single is Vicarious. The Pot and Jambi, the two other singles. The title is in reference to the character Jambi the Genie from Pee-wee's Playhouse TV show. Justin Chancellor's bass line. It reminded drummer Danny Carey of Jambi the Genie's chant. And what a great story behind the use of the talk box on this song. Guitarist Adam Jones got some advice from Joe Walsh, who's famously known for using the talk box on his song Rocky Mountain Way.
Yeah, so I mean, just first off, 10,000 Days was Tool's big return. And in terms of the song, they may have been longer in track times, but they did bring an inherent heaviness, which a lot of people, I think, was welcomed back to Tool. It was a brilliant start. Yeah, I mean, Vicarious is a fantastic opener, an absolutely pulsating rhythm section, and it really did feel like Tool was perhaps moving on again, not necessarily as dense as the stuff on Lateralus, but yeah, the Talkbox. So yeah, I mean, it was like you said, Rocky Mountain Way. It's effectively consistent of a speaker that feeds into a plastic tube. If you know, people might be listening to this who Do You Feel Like We Do by Peter Frampton. It was used on there. The famous use by John Bon Jovi on Living on a Prayer. And basically, yeah, how it came to be with Adam Jones's meeting was he had a friend who worked for the Eagles booking agent. And lo and behold, Joe Walsh received the number. And he called Adam about it, and they had a brief sort of message about it, talking about how he wanted to use it and what advice he could give of how to sort of get the best results out of it. And that's what you hear on the song. It is a very interesting addition to the song, sort of fairly late into the track as well, where it is generally a heavy metal song. But yeah, it does sort of add that extra sort of layer to the track, which makes it more memorable. Again, built on experimentation, methodical rehearsing, bordering on perfectionism, like a lot of Tool's songs. I think it's probably the takeaway moment of the track.
I feel like there's a little bit of a classic rock influence on Adam Jones's guitar solos at times. Listening to the music over the last few weeks, some of his solos, there's a lot of feel to it, a lot of taste to it that almost feels like Clapton-esque at times.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of his lead riffs and that are obviously more heavy and metallic. But the solos do seem to add a little bit more of a light to them. Again, I said that few people often consider him not necessarily an esteemed guitarist, perhaps to the levels of some of the greats and that. But what he does get out of the guitar is spectacular. It may be a simple sounding riff, for example, but with the effects that they use and the tunings, it makes it sound that more wholesome. And yeah, his solos, I think, again, a lot of it are just based around jamming in the studio or in a rehearsal room or whatever. But they do they do add another aspect to the songs, a nice little break in the calm before the storm, perhaps, before the songs fire back up. Yeah, some are sort of long winding, some are shorter and to the point, but they all have their own sort of charm and effect.
You lead the chapter on Tool's 2019 studio album, Fear Inoculum, by writing, quote, "A lot can happen in 12 months, so imagine just how much can change in 13 years. By the time Tool's fifth album saw the light of day, the world was a very different place to what it was upon the release of 10,000 Days back in 2006, and no one knew at that time things were only going to get stranger as 2020 was welcomed in. One thing remained a constant, however, people still love Tool, and they were begging to hear some new music. The title track, you say, is unlike previous album openers and a preview of what could be coming in the future from Tool."
Yeah, I mean, 13 and a half years. I mean, again, when I was growing up, I remember the chaos surrounding Guns N' Roses' release of Chinese Democracy, because that had taken so long to come out. And yeah, what you get with Fear Inoculum, I mean, it's just under 80 minutes of music. It surpasses Lateralus' running time. Every track is sort of over in double figures of running length. But the song itself, I mean, that is my favorite song off the album. It's slow building, it's jangly, it's different sort of percussion in there. Yeah, the atmosphere and the builds in those early sort of measures, the Middle Eastern percussion, Danny Carey, I think this album especially shows his percussive skills are some of the best. I mean, if you look at some of the drum cam videos on YouTube of tracks from this album, I mean, I don't think I've seen a bigger drum kit in my life. I mean, the toms and the hi-hats and the cymbals and the snares, everything he has around him. I mean, how you can continually play with precision is just mind-blowing to me. I love the chorus on this one. When it does come in, I mean, you only get 2 choruses on there, but it's funny how the song kind of hints at what's to come a year later. Obviously, we're now 3 years after the pandemic. It doesn't seem 3 years ago when we was all under lockdowns and the uncertainty surrounding it. Gigs were getting cancelled, sports events were being played behind closed doors. The Fear Inoculum song itself sort of it hints at, not necessarily, obviously they didn't know it was gonna come, but similar to the themes of fear and immunization, contagion, I exhale you. It's a brilliant line. I mean, well, there's brilliant line after brilliant line here. Like my own mitosis growing through delusion from mania. It sounds like a band that after 13 years they was going crazy not having new music, so they finally got together. They put all this together in, well, this is meticulous to the dot. I mean, it's crazy listening if you're a Tool fan, finally embracing new music. It's actually as well because it was released as a single, it just got inside the Hot 100 on the Billboard charts there. And it's also the longest ever song to do so, which I thought was quite an interesting little small anecdote there. David Bowie's Black Star, only by 24 seconds. But yeah, I mean, just going straight into Pneuma, I just want to touch on Pneuma because
that's the one I wanted to ask you about too. Yeah, Pneuma is interesting. Where does that word Pneuma come from?
It comes from the Greek meaning, supposedly, that which is breathed or blown. Again, it's a breathtaking song, taking on various layers of meaning for theologians and philosophers when it became a word for spirit and soul, which is represented in the lyrics, representing the concepts of breathing and spiritual freedom. We're born of one breath, one word, in 2 or 3 word bursts at a time in the main chorus here. And then this is the one particularly where I think Danny Carey's percussion skills and temperament is fully exhibited. Again, if you go back and look at a drum cam video on YouTube, this is the one that it still causes the hairs on the back of my neck to come up when watching, every different part of his kit that he's utilized throughout the song. It's over 10 minutes long, like most of the songs on there. But Pneuma I think a lot of people took away that song as the standout moment on the album. There is a little bit later in the album where you perhaps think, okay, it's getting a little overlong in places. They perhaps went a bit too, or they overcompensated a bit too much, whether it because they felt it was 13 years and they wanted to give the listener as much material as possible. But those first 2 tracks especially are 2 of the finest. I mean, I've got the vinyl box set they released a couple of years ago, and you could only fit 2 songs on one side of a vinyl record. That's the disc that I listen to more than ever because they are the 2 best songs on the whole album.
It's interesting you say that because I felt like, and this is something that I was talking about before we started recording, and I'm curious as to what Tool fans will think, but this I think is my favorite Tool album. I love the atmospheric feel to it. It's almost like a movie soundtrack type of feel at times. And the songs are long, but I felt like I didn't want them to end. I loved it. Now, I'm curious as to what your favorite Tool album is, and what is the general consensus among fans? Like, what is considered the best Tool album?
I think Lateralus seems to be the general consensus. Me personally is Ænema, but then especially during the writing of this book, I did come to appreciate 10,000 Days a lot more as well. And I would say that's probably up there just below Ænema for me now. I think in terms of the hardcore fan base of Tool, Fear Inoculum was graciously received. Yes, there is great content on there, some excellent songs that are sort of worthy as being among the best that Tool have ever done. But I think the fact of its near 80-minute running time, I think that was a bit of a gripe to some. I have seen a lot of people say that it did become overlong, a little bit oversaturated. There was a couple of the chocolate chip trip sort of long-winded interlude. There's a couple of songs on there that kind of could have easily been cut and condensed down a little bit more. I appreciate the album. I think it is a very good album. But I think for the fans that have been there from the beginning, I think they was thankful that it came out. Whether we will get another Tool album in the future, who knows? I think we probably will. But no, I think the allure of the late 90s and early 2000s material, where I guess you could say that it was a little bit more creative. This seemed to be just for the sake of it, I think, making the songs extra long, and there was passages there that could have been cut by a few bars. I think if it depends, I guess, perhaps people getting into Tool now, I think you sometimes do have more of an impact. The first album you listen to from a band, that's the one that probably is going to stick with you more than some of the others, the later material that you're going to get into. But no, I can't fault Tool for any of their music, really. I think I mentioned to you either during the recording or just before that Undertow is probably the less visited album of mine in terms of their whole discography. But everyone has their favourite, and everyone that I've seen and various groups and that, each album has been mentioned for one reason or another.
I was going to wrap up with, where do you think Tool will go from here? Will there be new music? Will it be another long wait for new music? What do you think?
Well, I don't think it will be as long as 13 and a half years.
Hope not.
We have to wait for this one.
Well, I don't want to be in an old age home when they come out with the next album.
Exactly, yeah. I know Maynard, he does a lot of work with Pussifer, which was obviously a later project, more of a trip-hop electronic kind of band that he formed, and he does a lot of, there's a lot more albums out there of Pussifer released in a shorter period of time than there has been of Tool. Whether they do single tracks, an EP even, but then again, knowing Tool, even an EP would probably be an hour long. Who knows? I think they probably will stick with the progressive rock formula going forward. We won't get the short, sharp bursts of the Undertow days and the likes of Stinkfist. But yeah, no, I'm sure they will keep going. Obviously Maynard is the busiest of all the members. Each band member have had various side projects and whatnot, and guest spots on other songs. But I think they realise that Tool is their bread and butter. I think they're playing a few festivals over in America this year. So whether that will sort of get them back into the mood to return to the studio and fire away, for all we know, they've probably even been writing us, in the last couple of years, especially during the COVID, when perhaps they had less on their plates to be able to do. So yeah, I think we will get new music. I'll make a bold statement. I reckon by 2024 we'll probably have something new, whether it's be just one or two songs or an album, who knows. But yeah, I'm confident we'll get something.
I like to hear that. Yeah, Tool, every album, every song. It's out now through Burning Shed and Amazon, wherever books are sold as well. Matt Karpe, any websites that you want to let people know about? You're on social media as well?
Mainly on Instagram, Matt_Karpe. That's where I kind of just hang about. And yes, as you mentioned earlier, the book, as well as my other books, are available through Amazon worldwide. I think in America especially as well, Walmart and Barnes & Noble, you can pick them up. Not sure whether they're physically in stores, but definitely online. Yeah, they're all available there.
Matt, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on the show.
That's it. It's in the books.